Well, Joel and Nancy, I have been looking forward to this for a long time. It's such a delight to have you as part of this conversation series. The future is calling us to greatness.
Well, thank you for having us.
We're glad to be here.
So, one of the things that I've been asking everybody to do at the start is to just, I don't want to assume that everybody watching or listening to this will know of your work and be familiar with your particular contribution. And since each of you has just brings so much, if each of you could just, Joel, why don't you start? And if you could just give us a sense of who you are, what you're passionate about, what you're known for, that sort of thing. Like, don't be bashful. Help the viewers in this series really get who you each are.
I'm a physicist. I have worked especially on the universe for the last 30 or so years. Uh, this has been a remarkable period in astronomy. Uh, we now know that the universe is mostly composed of two invisible things that we call dark matter and dark energy. And I've helped to develop the theory of how both of these things work. I've done some of the biggest simulations, both of the universe and of galaxies, and I'm helping to lead the biggest project in the history of Hubble Space Telescope, which is giving us wonderful new insights in how galaxies form. In addition to my scientific work, which also has earlier included helping to develop what we call the standard model of particle physics, I've also, for a long time, tried to create new institutions that improve the way our society deals with science and technology. I created the Forum on Physics and Society of the American Physical Society with help from some colleagues. I named it. I've chaired it. I created the Congressional Science and Technology Fellowship Program, which brings 50 scientists to work on the staff of Congress for individual representatives or senators or for congressional committees for a year each. I created the program on science and human rights of the American Association for the Advancement of Science. And I also chaired the Committee on Science, Ethics, and Religion for the American Association for the Advancement of Science. And I've done various other things. I'm a founder of the Union of Concerned Scientists, for example. And with Nancy, I led a delegation to Moscow back in 1988 that convinced the Soviet Union to stop putting nuclear reactors in orbit.
Wow.
So those are a few of the things that I've done beyond my scientific work. Most recently, Nancy and I have written two popular books about modern cosmology, the study of the whole universe, and how it can change the way we think about everything else. And Nancy has just finished a remarkable new book, re-envisioning the idea of God.
Cool. Well,
Roger?
Nancy,
Okay.
yeah, why don't you jump in there? I just want to pause and just say, well, actually, I'll save this till after you do a little introduction.
Okay, well, so I'm a sort of a motley collection of different professions. I started out in history and philosophy of science, and then I became a lawyer, and then I worked in Congress in their science advisory office, which was called the Office of Technology Assessment. Doesn't exist anymore, but it did. And Joel and I, when I watched Joel develop this new theory of the universe, I mean, we've been together for 37 years, and most of that time he's been working on this. And it is a completely new approach to the entire universe. It is just as big as the Copernican revolution. It's just that people don't realize it yet. But I've been watching this happen. And so I wanted to know, well, what does it mean? What does it mean for the rest of us? So we taught a course. We taught a course at the University of California, Santa Cruz for 10 years, where we tried to figure out how to present this new picture, how to make sense of it for people who have no science background. And then that turned into our first book, The View from the Center of the Universe. Then we were invited by Yale to give the Terry Lectures, and that turned into our second book, The New Universe and the Human Future. So now basically I think of myself as a writer rather than a lawyer or anything, but I think I'm also a political activist too in my way. So, and I have a new book, which will come out in March of 2015, called A God That Could Be Real. And this is a rethinking of God based on modern cosmology, what we actually know about how the universe operates.
Mm-hmm. Fabulous. Well, as the two of you know, and I want everybody watching or listening this to know as well, Connie and I count the two of you as just our dearest and nearest colleagues. We love your work. We love the two of you. We love what you're committed to. We just align completely with the way you take our best science, our best cosmology, and find ever more inspiring ways to articulate it that can bring us together, that can help us cooperate across a wide swath of differences. And inspire us in the way that the traditional cosmologies have, the great myths have, but this is grounded in science. In fact, Connie, as you know, took, I think, something like 50 or 60 of our favorite quotes from The View from the Center of the Universe. We have that up on our website.
I love that.
And we've shared your Terry lectures and your second book with countless people as well. And I keep sort of looking forward to reading your new book on God, so I'm hoping that I can.
We had a bit of an argument about that a few months ago, as I recall.
Oh, well, it was a little longer than a few months ago, but yeah, we come at the whole question of God talk from different angles, but I think that you have a platform, you have a voice. You will be appealing to people for whom I don't reach, so I see them as very complimentary. But I don't even. It's like your current thinking on it, I really don't know that well, so it's not like I can even critique it. But well, this series in particular is really focused around the whole notion that to have a sacred relationship to time is, among other things, not only the deep time, big picture, but also to live our lives in the present with a sense that the past is rooting for us and the future is calling us to greatness, that we are living in perilous times, we're living in challenging times, pregnant with possibility, but also really scary stuff. And so I just wanted to invite either or both of you to speak to this theme that how do you hold your place in the universe and sort of this, this cosmological orientation that orients you and lets you know who you are and where you are in space and time. How does that inspire you to do the work that you do, and how do you see that potentially inspiring greater numbers of us as we move into the future?
You want to start?
Well, I'll start and give you a sort of a big cosmic perspective on time, and then bring it more specifically to the particular thing that makes this time so special for humanity.
Okay.
So one of the things that, one of the errors that people make who don't really know much about the universe and maybe take the Bible literally, is to imagine that we're at the end of time or near the end of time. That time only began perhaps 6,000 years ago with humans on the sixth day of creation, and without very much more time to go. Well, that picture is just wrong. We now have very reliable ways of dating the solar system and the whole universe. And the universe has been around for almost 14 billion years. Earth and the other planets and the sun were created about 4.6 billion years ago. And the universe will continue to exist for as far into the future as we can imagine. Mm-hmm. Our galaxy will be about as bright 1,000 billion years from now as it is today. That's 1 trillion years. So we're near the beginning, if anything, but because of our uncertainties as we go back into the very distant past and as we try to think about the distant future, we should understand that we work outward from the present. We have the greatest knowledge about the present, and then as we go further away from the present in either direction of time, we know less and less.
Sure.
Now, another aspect of this present-centered thinking is to appreciate that we live in the middle of time in at least 4 different senses. The universe was expanding very rapidly after the Big Bang, And it's slowed down because gravity causes things to attract each other. And about 5 billion years ago, that process reversed. And the sort of negative gravity that's associated with space itself, we call it dark energy or the cosmological constant, has caused the universe to expand faster and faster. So we're near the changeover in the universe from slowing down its expansion to speeding up its expansion. And that process, it looks like, will continue for some time into the future. But we don't know that for sure. We're still trying to understand the nature of the dark energy. Now, the solar system is also roughly in the middle of the available time. As I said, it began a little over 4 billion years ago. It's going to continue for a period about as long as that. And then the sun will swell into a red giant, and the inner planets will be basically wrecked, including Earth.
Toast, right.
But this is many billions of years in the future. Sooner than that, the sun is going to become so hot that it's going to make life on Earth very difficult. This is not a problem that we're worried about in the near term. We're talking about hundreds of millions of years. Keep in mind that human-type creatures have only been on Earth for about 1 million years or so. So we're talking about the very distant future. And in fact, if our distant descendants continue to develop space engineering technologies, we could actually solve this problem by moving the Earth steadily further away from the sun. This kind of very large-scale planetary engineering may be possible in plenty of time for us to take care of that problem, that the sun is, like all stars of its type, getting steadily warmer. We have a very urgent short-term problem, though, and this is the fourth way that our time is very special. And that is that since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, about 1800, humanity has been increasing our consumption of material on Earth and our increasing production of waste products of various types with a doubling time of about 30 years. So, for example, if you plot the amount of carbon dioxide we put into the atmosphere, starting about 1800 with the Industrial Revolution, burning coal, first to clear out mines, then to run factories and locomotives and steamships, and ultimately to power the entire modern humanity. The increase in fossil fuel use and the increasing production of carbon dioxide have basically doubled every 30 years. Now, if we were to continue on that path, that would be 3 more doublings this century, 3 more 30-year period. And that's a factor of 8. Now, we're already putting carbon dioxide into the atmosphere so fast that it's greatly increasing the total amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. We've increased it from below 300 parts per million, which is what it was before the Industrial Revolution, to just over 400 parts per million. So we've increased the total amount in the atmosphere by more than 1/3. And the rate that we're increasing it is now growing very rapidly. The consequence has been a steady increase in global temperature, with new records for hottest year ever being set basically every year or two.
And ocean acidification and other things related to it.
Exactly. And actually, each of these is really just an example of the general Industrial Revolution and this very rapid increase in humanity's ability to process vast amounts of the material on the Earth's surface. The problem is that we're now having global impacts, and the impacts are becoming increasingly severe. The key thing to keep in mind is the 30-year time scale. That's the time scale over which we need to make changes. Now, the fact is that over the last couple of decades, renewable energy, solar power, wind power in particular, have become much cheaper. There's been a drastic decrease, especially in the price of solar electricity. And the result is that in the last couple of years, China, India, Germany, and a number of other countries have actually put more new energy in the form of solar and wind than all other forms. The United States is near that. So this is a very hopeful sign. What it means is that without even raising the price of carbon to reflect what we call externalities, already, despite the high subsidies that governments continue to give fossil fuels and the relatively lower and more uncertain subsidies for renewables and energy conservation, renewables and energy conservation are already winning. So I don't think that we have to be fanciful to imagine that economics plus a certain amount of just concern for the future can lead humanity to make drastic changes in the way we deal with energy and other aspects of the environment on a relatively short time scale. The biggest single problem that I see in the entire world is the Republican Party in the United States. They're against science, they're against truth, and they're wedded to fossil fuels. And that has to change. But I also think it's very optimistic that it shouldn't be that hard for such a change to occur. I don't know if it's going to require another crisis or whether just people increasingly realize the evil of the people who are opposing this necessary change. And it could be that in a period of 5 or 10 years, everybody is going to say, how could we ever have been so stupid? How could we ever think well of these companies that are actually damaging the entire Earth? And once that kind of mind change occurs, then that could make it much easier to make the sort of transition that humanity is going to have to make. Another one of the things that people need to realize is that as we become more and more concerned with personal development, to the extent that people in rich countries are mostly reasonably well off, we don't need to consume vast amounts of stuff. What we need is to have a healthy planet that we can bequeath to our children and grandchildren, and that's not impossible. That there's no law of physics that says we have to fail. It's largely a question of thinking right and then voting right.
Okay, let me jump in here because everything Joel says I completely agree with, but even if people realize what the problems are and what we've been doing wrong, it doesn't help them to figure out how to think about what we should be doing. There really needs to be a vision that is positive and that includes everybody, every human being on Earth. And this is really the big opportunity that I see from cosmology, from this new picture of the universe. Not just cosmology, it's the whole scientific picture, but it is coherent. And so one of the things that we've been trying to do is to try to phrase this new picture as a vision, as a way that people can find a new identity, really. And I think that this is really going to be very important. You can't really see a great future, a big, important future, if you don't see that there's been a big, important past. So I think that helping people to understand how ancient we are, how it took the whole 14 billion year history of the universe to produce us, that first there had to be the basic atoms had to come into existence. Then there had to be galaxies formed out of dark matter. And then the dark matter pulled together these atoms, and then they condensed into stars. And then the stars created all the heavy atoms. And there's a tremendous amount of history that's built into us. And if we could start understanding that we are this entire history, that every one of us holds it, then we could start seeing ourselves on a cosmic timescale. And that's important because people talk about aliens, but we don't know. We don't know if they're aliens. We could be the first.
Yeah.
We could be the beginning of intelligence in the entire visible universe. We just don't know.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that the best thing we can do is assume that we are and act as if we are.
Yeah.
Live up to that standard. How could we possibly go wrong living up to that standard?
Yeah. Yeah. Amen. Well, I mean, just this morning I preached at a Unitarian Universalist church, a couple services in Cleveland. And one of the main points that I made was that we are a lot older, bigger, and more related than most of us have any idea. And so I did this whole thing on big history and, we are the universe becoming conscious of itself and all that. And it's like when we get that, then we can be inspired to be of service to a grand future, not just sort of like to get humans to do less bad, but to actually see this as a time of transformation that future generations, 1,000 years from now, 500 years from now, 200 years from now, can look back and see that this was one of the grandest shifts in human, in not just human consciousness, but in human social structure. We have to, I mean, I agree with you, Joel, that right now the Republican Party is so largely bought by big oil and coal. But I think that the whole idea of deregulated capitalism as our way of doing economics has to shift. This whole globalization. I'm right now, as I mentioned before I turned the recorder on, Connie and I are right now in the middle of listening to Naomi Klein's new book, This Changes Everything, which we both love it so far. But this holding the past. There's a quote of yours. I forget something about without a big picture, we're very small people. And I think that in what I found most useful, rather than just scaring the bejeebies out of people, is like giving a sense of the grand past, and that here we are in the present moment, and we could potentially co-create something truly amazing, which just doesn't mean it's not going to have suffering, doesn't mean it's not going to have difficulties, doesn't mean that Earth won't have to come to some new stabilized climate. But there was one question that you were mentioning, Joel. You're saying 4 places or 4 ways that we're at the center, and I think you got to the third one, and we're describing sort of our time. But I didn't quite understand how that places us in the middle or the center. Is that the time frame in terms of?
Well, the 4 that I had in mind are, first of all, cosmological, the switchover in the universe from slowing down its expansion to speeding up.
Right.
The middle of the entire lifetime of our solar system, between the creation of the sun and when the sun turns into a red giant, right, and ultimately into a planetary nebula and shedding off the outer parts and a white dwarf star, which is kind of a dead star. And then from the point of view of Earth itself, Earth developed an oxygen-rich atmosphere thanks to microorganisms only a little over 500 million years ago, and that's when large creatures, animals and plants, started to develop, multicellular creatures with organs. And in about 500 million years, unless our descendants figure out how to move the Earth further from the sun in a slow but steady way, the Earth will become too hot. So the third thing is that we're living in the middle of the great period for Earth, the period from when Earth got an oxygen-rich atmosphere.
Right. For creatures like us, right, exactly.
Earth would, after it becomes too hot, only be suitable for microorganisms again.
Right, exactly.
And then finally, there's this great transition, this is number 4, that we humans have to make. The transition beyond exponential growth in our use of resources and our generation of waste. And there's no reason that we can't prosper during that transition and after that transition, because once a society becomes sufficiently rich, it mainly depends on service and on recycling and reusing materials. It's not necessary to keep generating new sources of materials and new sorts of waste. And that's been our big problem. And of course, that will require a fair amount of reorganization of society. And no one knows what's going to be optimal but it's clear that there are going to be major changes,
Right.
and these changes are probably going to require a new way of thinking about everything.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Well, and one of the
so that's a
places.
big challenge for our time, and our time is the crucial time. We can't have Earth is not going to allow 3 more episodes of doubling.
Right.
This century is the last century
Yes.
that will see that kind of increase in human impact on Earth. And the big issue is how it's going to change, whether we're going to have an awful overshoot where there's a huge die-off,
Mm-hmm.
which happens with algae when they overpopulate a pond,
Mm-hmm.
and then they can kill all the other organisms. Are we smarter than algae? That's the are we smarter than pond scum? That's in some sense the big question.
The jury's out on that one for sure. Well, I'm curious, what wakes you each up on a day-by-day basis? I mean, you're so involved in all the right things. I mean, from my vantage point, I mean, how do you stay inspired? What aspects? I mean, you just articulated some of them, of course, but what do you find inspires you most to be of service, to be in action, to do the work that you're doing?
Well, let me come back to the idea of the vision, because
Okay.
a vision is inspirational by definition.
Okay. Yeah.
And I feel incredibly privileged to be able to work on the vision. When I was on the staff of Congress, I was always working on the problems. I was always fighting this and fighting that. And it was really very depressing.
Mm-hmm.
And I moved out to California and I got away from that. And let me tell you, it's really better to focus on the positive, because you can't win by fighting all of the negative things that are happening. There will always be more negative things,
Right.
especially because they have so much money, they can just create any number of negative things. Focus on the positive. So now what I've done in my new book, or what I've tried to do here,
Mm-hmm.
is to create a coherent big picture that we can have, that not only describes, what's going on Earth, but who are we? What are we as human beings?
Mm-hmm.
How do we fit in? And really, in my opinion, there can't be a really complete big picture without an understanding of God.
Mm-hmm.
I know that a lot of my friends, and I'm not sure where you exactly stand in this. We will work this out, Michael. But a lot of my scientist friends don't like the word God,
Mm-hmm.
especially the religious naturalists who really do want some kind of a spiritual understanding of the world, but they don't like that word. But I think that it's arguably the most powerful concept in our minds.
Mm-hmm.
And we are going to need all the help we can get
Mm-hmm.
to get through this transition that Joel was talking about. And I think we could probably use that concept in a positive way. Right now, I think it's being used in a very negative way by millions and millions of people who are using it either to fight with people who don't see it the same way they do, or are using it to hold back from understanding the real science and what's really at stake
Mm-hmm.
on our planet. They would rather hide inside these old pictures.
Mm-hmm.
So my goal really has been to figure out how can we think about God in a way that is not only completely consistent with science, but that really enlarges us as human beings, that gives us a whole new way of approaching the world and also unites us. So that's what my new book is about, a God that could be real.
Mm-hmm.
And it's been very inspiring to me to work on this. And I find that almost everybody I talk to about it really wants to read it, because they need that. Everyone realizes that we can't just write off the idea of God, because that's going to write off billions of people on this planet who have every right to use that concept.
Yeah. Well, I'm with you 100%. I mean, you and I may not use the word God in identically the same way. I suspect we don't. But Connie and I have been, I've been freely, in fact, I've even started articulating why I think it's important for religious people of various stripe to when they use the word God, that we're not pointing to some supernatural being who's on this side but against those people over there or whatever.
Yeah.
But we're talking about an I-thou relationship to what's inescapably real, whether we believe in it or not. So I am radically in favor of redeeming the word God and using it in a way that's totally accurate scientifically. And I look forward to learning from you ways to do that I've not thought through yet. So whenever I can read a draft of your book, or do I have to wait till it's out on the
Oh,
bookshelves?
no. The galley will be arriving very soon.
Okay, good. Great. Well, here's a question that Connie has specifically asked that I ask folk, and that's if you were to have, and you have an interesting twist on it. Feel free to interject that. But if you could have dinner with any three people in human history, a dinner party where it's the two of you and these three people, or just one-on-one, so it's the two of you and having a glass of wine or beer or whatever with any three people in history, who would those three people be, and why would you choose them?
Well, I have to put Shakespeare at the top of my list because here's a guy who wrote absolutely brilliant, funny, deep stuff, and we don't know anything about him. We know nothing about his life. I would love to have a conversation with him.
Yeah.
And I'm going to choose English-speaking people because unless we had one of those little fish that go in your ear from the Douglas Adams novel,
right.
I wouldn't be able to talk to Plato or anybody like that. So George Bernard Shaw, I would love to have a chat with him. Okay. Here's a guy who was an absolutely brilliant writer and socially incredibly daring and original activist. I'd like to talk to him. And, John Lennon, I'd love to talk to John Lennon. Okay. I'm thinking about women. It's not that easy. My favorite novelist is Edith Wharton, and I think I would really enjoy talking to her too. Okay. So maybe I would get a fourth person in there, so I can email at the table with me.
All right, and Joel, who would you like to invite?
I'd certainly like to participate in Nancy's dinner.
He's invited.
But so I thought of Einstein because I'd so much like to see his reaction to our new understanding based on, of course, his ideas of how the universe works. Yeah. The thing that he didn't anticipate was that there was so much of this extra invisible stuff. Yeah. But he did partly anticipate at least the dark energy. But nobody really anticipated the idea that most of the matter is some other kind of stuff. It's not even made of atoms. And we're, of course, quite sure of that now. So I'd also really like to talk to two other very great scientists who are also very interesting human beings, Galileo and Benjamin Franklin.
Oh, yeah.
And of course, Ben Franklin combines, as I've tried to in a much smaller way in my own life, politics and science. He was probably the greatest scientist of the period in which he lived. He is regarded in the United States as an important inventor, and of course he was. He invented bifocals and the Franklin stove and
daylight savings time.
And
really, he was behind daylight savings time. Okay.
And also, well, actually,
candles.
It was to save candles, and also, of course, lightning rods.
Yeah, right.
And many other things. But he was a very great scientist. He's the first one who understood the Gulf Stream.
Yeah, right.
He had an estimate of the size of atoms a century before anybody else, from measuring just how far oil could spread out on the surface and realizing that it was an atom thick. And he was the most important person developing the concepts of electricity for the period in which he was active. He's the one who realized that charges come positive and negative. He's the one who introduced that concept, for example. So, but of course, he also was the gray eminence at the Constitutional Convention of the United States. And he helped to design the whole structure of the American system of government, and which was, of course, the first republic. So it's a new system of government, and it's got its problems, but arguably it's been remarkably successful over the long term. So, and of course, Galileo is the inventor of modern science. So these would be Wonderful people to have dinner with.
Well, any combination of the people that you all mentioned, I'd love to. Connie and I would love to be in on that.
Michael, sure.
Thanks.
Can I say though what I think would be a more interesting question?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Because when we talked the other day, on the phone, you mentioned that, and I thought, oh wow, so please,
and I
yes.
think it's really important. I would love to have this entertaining dinner with Shakespeare and so forth. But what I have been asking people, and really no one knows how to answer this question, is if a flying saucer landed in front of you and aliens came out and they said, "Take me to your leader," who would you take them to?
That's a great question. Yeah.
Because who is it? Who would we trust to talk to the aliens? Who? I mean, to me, that is a really profound question because it says so much more than any of our political leaders could possibly do.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great one. One of the people that Connie and I have been reading most, I mean, probably our favorite author these days is John Michael Greer. He was actually the first person that I interviewed in this series. He writes a blog that comes out once a week called the Archdruid Report. And I think I've read 8 of his books in the last year and a half. So he would certainly, he's not necessarily my leader, but he's certainly someone, as the two of you are, somebody I would not want an alien to visit this planet without meeting the two of you and without meeting John Michael Greer.
I don't feel confident to meet the aliens at all, but it would be really interesting. I don't know his books. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, I guess just to begin winding down, if you were to speak to a young person who's just full of despair at this point, they're looking to a future and it's just scary as hell, what would you say to a young person that would be helpful? And then somebody who's, say, in their retiring years, over 60, let's say, what would you say to someone, sort of an aging boomer, that would be encouraging and supportive?
The first thing I would say is to read this wonderful book by Theodore Roszak called The Making of Elder Culture. This is the guy who wrote The Making of the Counterculture when we were kids in the 60s. And it's really a fascinating book. And it basically says, look, you guys, you aging boomers, you had wonderful ideals in the 60s, but you were very young. You had no money. You had no jobs. Mm-hmm. You didn't have families yet. Life hit, and you had to disperse and basically do what you have to do. But now you're retired, you have money, and you still have those ideals. Now is the time to realize them.
Oh, that's great.
That elders, instead of being just, written off as finished, could really be the core of a whole new way of approaching the future. And could also be the allies of the very young. And I really like this idea of the elders and the very young together. And the middle ages, you just have to deal with the hassles of life. So one, I'd say read the book. For the young people, it's so easy to scare young people by just telling them all the terrible things that are happening. But what about all the great things that are happening? So are you interviewing Paul Hawken for this series?
No, not.
Oh my goodness! Interview Paul Hawken. His book, Blessed Unrest.
Yes, exactly. That's one of our top sellers.
So here's a guy who's actually gone around the world. He's found something like 1 million different social justice movements and environmental movements and stuff, and he has basically analyzed them and says this is a movement. This is a coherent movement. The parts just don't know about each other.
Yeah, no, I agree. I actually reached out to him to be part of this series, but the email address that I had for him no longer is good, and I wasn't able to get through to him.
Okay, but the young people can still read his book.
Exactly, Blessed Unrest. Yeah.
The other thing is, it's very, very important for young people to realize that their allies are the other young people around the world, not the older people in their house or their country or their city. That the real unity has to be in their age cohort around the world. and forget about the religions and the political biases and all the crap that you're being handed down from generations before, because that clearly has left us in this terrible situation. If you look at what the millennials are doing, the blogging that they're doing, the values that they show, it's so much more positive than what older people are doing. So my advice to the young people is don't worry about all of this stuff that you're being told. This is possible. We have to make money. Capitalism is the only system. Rah, rah, rah. Look at what people your age are interested in, and unify on that level.
Yeah, that's so true for my daughter, my youngest daughter, she's 24, and she identifies more with other 20-somethings worldwide than she does with Americans or Christians or any other smaller group. It's a very different set of values and priorities and commitment.
It's a wonderful development.
No, yeah, that's great.
Well, also this expansion of human loyalty to ultimately the entire human race and all life and Earth is an essential thing. Yes. We have to expand our thinking that way. In addition to expanding in time, we have to expand in that other sense. And so that's, I think, really important advice to everybody. And of course, part of it is people have to understand more. It's not, of course, just cosmology. We've had this tremendous breakthrough in biology. And the breakthroughs in biology are at several different levels. So, of course, there's a genetic revolution. We now know humans are more closely related to all other humans on Earth than almost any other species is related to other members of the species. Humans went through at least one and maybe several bottlenecks where there were only a relatively small number of humans. And this occurred only several tens of thousands of years ago. So we're humans very, very closely related.
Yes.
But of course, we also know that all living organisms share exactly the same genetic code. They read the DNA exactly the same way and convert it into proteins. We share a lot of the same biochemical pathways with mushrooms and yeast, as well as with fancier plants and animals. So it's very important for humans to get some of this background. And then the other thing that I think is really remarkable about modern biology is the realization that the interesting new developments have occurred by a process where, as complexity increases, new things can happen. And of course, the most complex thing that we have ever discovered in the entire universe is the human brain. And out of the human brain, all of culture has developed. So there's this basic idea of emergence that we see it in the social insects, the ants and the bees, for example, where each individual hardly knows anything about what the whole hive or anthill is doing, but collectively they can do amazing things.
Yes.
And in that same way, collectively, the neurons in our brains can do amazing things, and the people on Earth can do amazing things working together. And so that idea that new things can constantly develop as the situations become more complex and more interactive, that's one of the great insights of science.
Yes.
It started in physics, but it's now become essentially the basis of a lot of our understanding of how organisms and societies develop. And it also is the underlying idea in Nancy's book. So it's in that sense also that her book reflects a modern understanding of science, not just cosmology.
Yeah, well, that's
Let me
great.
just say one more thing for the young people.
Sure.
And or actually for anybody who's really depressed about the state of the world. And that is that in the universe, on different size scales, different physical laws actually control what's going on. You can't imagine that a single physical law is going to control everything from the galaxies down to the bacteria. You can't. So, using that as our basis for thinking about this, we can be emotionally very upset about, say, your child is hit by a car. I mean, you just, you're all your adrenaline's running, your emotions are going crazy. That's actually appropriate because that's how we evolved. But if you start feeling those same emotions when you hear that the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere has gone above 400 parts per million, that is what I call emotional scale confusion. And that is dangerous because that's not what those emotions evolved to be about. They're not about statistical, abstract concepts. We should be aware of those things. We should care. We should feel urgency to deal with these issues, but we should not feel like our lives are being destroyed or I'm miserable or I can't have children because I can't bring them into the world. All of those emotions are really inappropriate when it comes to statistical abstractions, which is really what we're talking about when we're talking about the fate of the earth. So what we have to learn to do is to feel in different ways at the same time on different subjects. We can live a perfectly happy, loving life on the small scale and still be fighting the big things on the large scale. And the fact is, if we don't have this happy, loving life to support our work, we're not going to succeed on the big scale.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's an interesting way of thinking about it. I've never thought about it in terms of scale like that. But I sort of naturally do that, but I've never had it articulated the way you just did.
Well, actually, this is in the View from the Center of the Universe, that idea of emotional scale confusion.
But it's really very useful for people who are feeling terribly depressed. And I have personal friends who say to me, I don't want to bring children into the world because it's so messed up. And I'm thinking, oh, that thinking is what's messed up. Bring your child into the world. Love the child. Be happy with the child. But work to solve this problem. And let the child grow up to be a worker to solve these problems. Anyway.
Where is that? Where is that in the View from the Center of the Universe? Do you remember what chapter that is?
No, I don't know the chapter, but
it'll be in the index.
Okay, all right, I'll check it out because it just means I need to go back and do another reading because I'd forgotten.
We introduced the Ouroboros.
Okay, all right,
We call it Ouroboros thinking.
Okay,
it's cool. This idea that different things are important, different laws of physics control on different length scales, and then by analogy, different sorts of thinking are appropriate on different scales of human interaction.
Cool.
You can't memorize the book.
Well, yeah, no, exactly. So, if people want to go more deeply into your ideas, the titles of your book again: "The View from the Center of the Universe" and "The New Human and the Universe Future."
The New Universe and the Human Future.
Isn't that what I said?
No, you said the
New Human.
Oh, I meant the New Universe. Yeah.
That's a possibility.
Right. Okay. Right. And then your new book is the possibility of God.
No, the new one is called A God That Could Be Real.
A God That Could Be Real. Okay, great.
So what Nancy does is she asks the question not whether God exists, but of all the things that exist, is there anything that's worthy of the name God?
Yeah.
So it's a different question.
It's a different approach.
It leads to a very different sort of thinking.
Cool.
And we'll have another conversation like this after you've read that.
Yeah, well, I look forward to it because, in fact, I'll want to record that probably as part of my Evolving Faith podcast series, where where I get more into specifically like how do we even think about God, talk about God in ways that are inspiring and that ways that are accurate scientifically.
So Nancy and I were the sort of keynote speakers at the 60th anniversary Star Island Conference of the Institute on Religion in an Age of Science. That was a couple months ago. And I have to say, we were really a hit. So there were, Nancy and I gave the joint talk at the beginning of the first day of the conference, and then Nancy gave her talk about her book at the afternoon of the first day. And then there were two discussants in the evening. And then for the next 2 days, special sessions were organized so that many people could get together with us and talk some more about these ideas.
That's great. Well, I heard a little bit about that because Connie and I spent 3 days in Loyal Rue's cabin and he was sharing, both Ursula's perspective and because the IRAS and what they've been about and what the two of you are about is such a natural fit that it would be shocking to me to hear that you weren't a hit.
Well, actually, we were invited in previous years, but it always conflicted with something. This year we were able to go, and of course it was especially timely because Nancy's book's going to be coming out.
Yeah.
And they are, of course, a perfect audience.
Yeah. Well, and
of new ideas that we're trying to promulgate.
Yeah, they really are. Terry Deacon, to this day, I've come to, when I try to describe what I am, I'm a religious naturalist, but emergentist is the language that I've settled on, that I use probably most often. No, I'm not a materialist. No, I'm not a spiritualist. I'm an emergentist, a sacred realist, as I sometimes use that language now. Terry Deacon and Ursula Goodenough's chapter that they wrote for some Oxford University book, The Sacred Emergence of Nature or something like that, is still one of my
Best thing
favorites.
I ever read about emergence.
Yeah, same thing. Me too.
So here's a little secret.
Okay.
Ursula helped Nancy improve her discussion of emergence.
That's fabulous. That's great.
So the final version of the book has this very nice help from Ursula.
That's great. Except it wasn't a secret. I had learned that already from Loyal Rue. And I was delighted to hear, because I think that, when I said at the beginning of this interview that Connie and I find the two of you, our closest colleagues, right up there is Loyal Rue and Ursula Goodenought, and Terry Deacon, although he's a little thicker. His book was reading his book Incomplete Nature was almost like reading Steps to an Ecology of Mind. It's just a real dense reading, really important, but not an easy read. So your website or websites?
Well, we have a website, new-universe.org. No, is it
Yeah, .org.
.org.
Okay.
Which also now exists in Spanish.
Oh, really?
So the book came out in Spanish.
Okay.
And so we actually recreated the website in Spanish.
Wow.
So it's El Nuevo Universo.
Right, El Nuevo Universo. Right, if you go to the English one, right at the top, you can just click Spanish and the whole thing will just switch.
Okay, cool.
So that's cool.
But you have a new website
And
of
I'm
your own.
developing a website, NancyEllenAbrams.com.
Okay.
But it's not done yet. So,
Is that going to have any of your music? Because you didn't mention that
Yes.
you're also a political musician.
Yeah, it's
Right.
going to have my music. I will mention that I have a music video. I think you may have seen it.
I did.
For Hired Brain. Okay.
Yes, I thought it was
if anyone
fabulous.
just goes to YouTube and goes to Hired Brain, especially the full version, which is the best version,
Right.
they can see my YouTube song, which is basically a satire about the evil scientists, the ones who claim there is no such thing as global climate change and tobacco is not addictive.
Yeah. Well, I listened to the book,
Good for you.
the Merchants of Doubt by Naomi Oreskes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes. So, in fact, at the end of the video, it says, if you want to know all the documentation, just read that
Oh,
book.
good.
See, it's one of
Merchants
the
of Doubt.
mine was one of the few music videos that has a footnote.
Why am I not surprised? Well, this has been great. Let's conclude this, and I'm going to run and get Connie, and then we can just catch up. So thank you both so much for being part of this series.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you, Michael.
All right.